Let's see, is this working? Okay. That film was made last year by young filmmaker Jessica Yu for an event when art and film gala where we honored James Turrell, which followed a huge retrospective that we had in Los Angeles. Before getting to talk about Road and Crater, I wanted to just show a few pictures and focus in on some of the images you saw in the film. And talk about them a little bit by introduction and maybe have some conversation about that. This is a work from 1966 called Afram, and you saw it in the movie. And of course, photography cannot capture this work. It is a work that is a projection of light in the corner of a room, but it's not evident when you walk in to the room. And this work was the first work you saw in our exhibition in Los Angeles. And it's not, when you walk into this room, it's not clear what it is. You're not sure if it's a hole through the wall or if it's something that's three-dimensional in front of the wall. And as you move, this cube moves with you. It has an incredible dynamic. Now, this is really James's first work of art. No painting, no drawing, just putting this projection into space. I could say, well, that has something to do with, Los Angeles is big on productions, projections of light, like movies as well. But you said to me one time, you were talking about the fact that in art history class, we're always seeing projections of images. And you had this fundamental realization, well, why deal with the image? Why not just deal with the light itself, that physical thing? As you said, as an American, you're very direct. But of course, the light, that physicality of light, and this really feels physical. I think all of James's work has had to do with this idea that light can be something that you can hold and touch as we touch it with our eyes. You said in this short film, and I think it's so important, that we are part of making what we behold.
Yes, I don't know. I don't have this. Is
this? Are we on here?
I'm not. Oh, well, here I am. Okay. Thank you. And I first saw art projected. I mean, basically, on the West Coast, we did have. It hadn't formed then. The LA County Museum. We had the Pasadena Art Museum, and actually, the director of that and is here today. But he was also Jim Dimitrian was also my teacher at Pomona College, and people forget how important teachers and people that you meet, they're just doing their job as a teacher, but these are the things that actually can inspire you. And so that was very important. And I saw art history projected. And so the Mona Lisa was the same size as a Barnett Newman. Filled the screen. And also had this luminous quality because of the beaded glass screen. And so it was strange when I saw the actual works later in my life. Sometimes it was surprising how small they were and also how dull they were. But I had seen them in this projected fashion. So I started out as an artist. I was very interested in light. And then I remember that connecting with my grandmother, who was this conservative Wilburite Quaker who always talked about going inside to greet the light in meditation and how there is light in everyone. And so this idea of light was important to me, and lo and behold, the history of art is littered with depictions of light. And we can start anywhere you like to start, whether it's with Rembrandt or Caravaggio or Vermeer. Turner, how about Turner? Someone so prescient in terms of what was to come later. Then all the Impressionists, of course, and then Rothko. And I remember the making of this show that had Lichtenstein and Rothko in the show, and how the light came out of this painting. It wasn't something that, it did contain it. It was something that it emanated, and some of these qualities are actually rather small when you describe them. It's like I remember just putting light onto a wall, and the fact is when you had a shape, it couldn't be seen as being on the wall. It was either slightly in front of it or sort of hold through it. So this quality was magical, that it was something very plastic or manipulative. You could actually use light to create space. And so this idea of using light to create space was something marvelous to me. And you probably know that if you're on stage and you have all the stage light, the footlights and the stage lighting on you, sometimes there's so much light you can't see the audience. So you're in the same architectural, physical space as the audience, but a completely different visual space. No different than when the light of the sun lights the atmosphere, you can't see through the atmosphere to see the stars that are there. So actually light is a space maker, and this idea that I could actually use it even close to people to actually control where you saw and didn't see, and how this transparency and opacity was, those were these wonderful things. Now this is not big news, but this is something that thrilled me as an artist to work with. And so it's these small things that in the end we work with. And it began in this classroom looking at projected images, and so I started out with projections.
And many people say, well, what's your medium? And you know, you do things that are painterly with color, but you're not a painter. You make objects, but you're not really a sculptor. You've made architecture in buildings, but you wouldn't necessarily call yourself an architect. And so when described, yes, light is part of your medium.
Yes.
But also, the most important part of your medium for me and what I've learned is this idea about perception, that quotation that we take for granted, this idea that we see something, we all see it the same way, or it's there objectively. And the one thing I've learned, and I see every time I am at Road and Crater or in one of your works, and then you deconstruct why I felt or saw that, it's because half of it was me contributing, putting things in. Projecting myself, my expectations. Yes. Color. We have works in color at LACMA that are immersive. That this one is on view now. It's called Breathing Light. And it is a work, when you first encounter it and it's outside this space, it appears to be a painting on the wall that's physical, like a rectangle in color. The color starts changing, which is a little strange, but it feels like a flat plane. There are stairs up to it. And like Alice in the Looking Glass, you actually then walk through this plane of light that seems physical to break the plane, and then you're immersed in light, and then you walk toward the light, and this light seems to be infinite, or if not infinite, you are absolutely unsure about where it begins and ends, and the color keeps changing. Breathing, it's called Breathing Light. And it took me a while, and then you turn backwards to look through the aperture from whence you came, which is a room of white light, and yet that aperture is green, or blue, or orange, or all of these range of colors, and it defies understanding, because if I poke my head back through that wall, it's white again. And you come up with this incredible realization that the color I'm seeing, perceiving, is in me. I'm the one who must have created that environment by being in pink light, and so therefore I see green. And it's such a fundamental realization for me, because it doesn't just apply to aesthetics or to color. It does, or in art history, but it also applies to everything. It means everything, whether it's history or people or reading or things I come upon, that I have to recognize that the context is everything, and that I am contributing to this seeing. And it has something about this, Road and Crater is a huge monument, but it's a monument to the fragility of perception. And I guess you kind of also started right there with psychology, right? That you knew that going into art.
Well, I took painting classes at Pomona College, and when you mix blue with yellow, you get green. But if you're wanting to work with light and you mix blue light and yellow light, you're going to get white light. So this is a shock, and something that a lot of people don't expect. And so the big thing is you have to learn the spectrum, because it's a whole different way of thinking. And so I actually had to learn about perception, how we perceive particularly light, as opposed to how we mix paint. So the color wheel is gone, and now you're involved in relationships that are quite different and have to do with how we perceive the spectrum and how that comes to us. And then, of course, there are these monuments to people discovering this idea of seeing. First of all, when Daguerre wanted to fix the image, he did so with mercury onto a silver plate and was able to actually make the daguerreotype. But he got subverted and became very successful as a photographer. But remember, he originally had been a painter of dioramas, where you would come up from beneath, and there would be this painting, and they often put these paintings in these great expositions. And one in Paris, he had this scene of this Alpine Swiss village, and you came up and you saw it during the day, and then light was put on the back of the canvases, and of course the clouds were heavily painted, so they became dark. There were little windows in the chalets and all, and so this is a painting that was actually,
Yeah.
you know, it was an installation. So installation painting, he was doing this, but of course he then got subverted by becoming a successful photographer and never did any more of that again. So this is a revisionist history that I'm giving you of how this came out of the diorama, how it came out of the camera obscura, and also another thing in terms of light was Edwin Land, because he was actually a researcher and he was actually dealing with color vision. Now this is where the true ideas of color theory should go, and he's the one most expressive of this. And of course, he dealt with green and red, or green and blue, green, and red, and that's how he made the Polaroid. Of course, he was subverted and became successful in that, and never did any more research in color vision. So what happens is that we all start out with these ideals, and some of them had amazing tracks to follow. And certainly with color vision, it was Land, and certainly with the diorama and the, certainly the, the big, I don't know, sort of installation kind of paintings.
Cycloramas too.
Cycloramas, things like that, and the one by Mig in Holland is still there. A few of these still exist, so they're quite interesting kind of anomalies in the history of art.
So you have this idea of the light out there. Again, you do deal with nature even inside, because this is a little like being in a whiteout or being in a cloud or being these spaces which are indeterminate, and then you have a different kind of emotion from that. Before we go outside to the landscape, just to go inside, another work, that work of Art Breathing Light is on view in Los Angeles right now. In 1968 in Los Angeles, you were invited as part of LACMA's Art and Technology Project with Robert Irwin, another artist who identified you, and a scientist, Ed Wirtz, and you discussed not art but perception and how we see and feel. And I know there were a number of experiments at that time about even sensory deprivation and what happens when I'm put in different environments over time. This is a work of art that is in LACMA right now in Los Angeles, and it looks a little like a sphere or a spaceship or something like that. There's a computer, and what you're not seeing is if you go to LACMA and you make a reservation, you're greeted by some attendants in white lab coats. You take off your jacket and your shoes, and you lie down on a bed, and you are rolled inside this sphere for one program for about 11 minutes. And I actually do this regularly. I enjoy it. It calms me down for a board meeting or anything important I have to do. It actually does calm you down. The longer programs are hard to stay awake in because it's so calming. And what happens is you're lying down and you're in a Ganzfeld. This is one of these spaces which is of indeterminate depth. And color and strobing color is introduced. And all of a sudden, not only are you pretty sure you're seeing colors that aren't there, but then you start seeing shapes, geometries, like geometric painting, architecture, beehives, rain, and you're not sure where it's coming from. Now, there's nothing inside the sphere except nothing. It's just empty. And the light has created that, but the truth is that you, the viewer, I, am creating it from within. So this is an art, a kind of geometry, abstract painting that is created from within, that it is my eyes and my seeing. I think you once talked about it, you talk about it as a seeing from behind the eye seeing. You know, if you know a little the history of art, Renaissance painters always saw the painting as a window, right? It's a fake window, and then you can see through into nature or space, a fake three-dimensional depth. And then in the modernists said, oh, no, that's sort of illusion, and we don't want to deal with illusion. We're going to make a painting that's just paint, really flat, right in front of you, right to the point. And I think the last thing to do with that picture plane of painting is sort of to put it, only one place to go is behind the eyes. And when I was in this, I realized you had achieved that. But again, it's a phenomenon that I realize all of a sudden. I am making these colors, I am making these forms, and there is a quality to it of kind of intense relaxation. I had a friend who went in who's an insomniac, incredible insomniac. He said he slept for 2 weeks easily after being in this chamber. You know, and I'm not sure I know how it works, but I know it comes from that early research and thinking about, you know, experience. I don't.
Well, in art history, you talk a lot about the picture plane, which we would discuss, and I would like things that would take place. You know, I use the structured environment as Plato's cave, and so there are images that are kind of, in some way, reflective of our reality. Of course, we would look at them in the cave as upside down and backwards, but that's how we get them in the retina. And so this idea that Plato was talking about in Book 7 of the Republic is something that is reflected in art, both with this picture plane that's out there and that we actually can see through, or things are behind the picture plane, and here I have work that comes in front of the picture plane. And then I even would cut through the walls, cut through the ceiling, and have that still be this picture plane, bring the sky down to the space that you're in. But then eventually just take that picture plane and pull it over your head, as in like a t-shirt, which I also have to say is a little bit of what we do as a planet when we start to reduce the ozone layer, and that makes these holes, and then eventually, you know, you can lose this whole atmosphere and it just becomes the rings. Which is something we'd like not to do,
If possible.
and we're now thinking about. Yes, but this idea of taking this picture plane and really putting it so it's all taking place in your head. It's not actually out. None of this that you see, the geometry or even most of the color, is not out there at all in that sphere. It's actually inside your head. So.
Yeah, it's funny because some people would wonder, is it the sculpture I'm seeing? What is it as an artwork? And yet it functions as a great artwork should, because it causes you to think, it is immersive, it's emotional, and you actually have images that you see. This interiority is really interesting. And what's also interesting about it is this is artwork that can be experienced only by one person alone over 11 minutes. And one of the curious things to me about your practice is that you've run the gamut. So you have this piece for one person, and then recently you made a huge work in the Guggenheim, which was the most well-attended exhibition, I think, ever in the Guggenheim's history, a work where you took Frank Lloyd Wright's building and introduced colored light into that space where people were literally lying on the ground, waiting in lines around the block. So it's interesting, this range of expression from the singular experience to a collective experience, and I think you've played with both. I want to go to, I know David's arriving soon. Oh, he's here? Where is he? Oh. David, get over there. We just got to the architecture component. So, David Adjaye.
David. Okay.
What do I say?
Yeah. Okay. You said we were going to talk about you.
Perfect timing.
If you
Well,
weren't
we
here.
hadn't actually started, but we actually worked on a project very early on, some time ago, in Siwa. That's an oasis in Egypt. But it's the oasis where Alexander the Great had his epiphany. And he was going to then leave and take over the world. And in fact, David has. and I see your work all over. I've been in Russia. I see it here, see it everywhere I've been going, and it's marvelous to see that.
You can comment on Jay. I'll show a couple of images here just of a project you wouldn't otherwise or easily be able to visit just before we get to Rodent Crater. James is always out in the world in these strange places experimenting and doing things that then come back, I think, to this huge project, Rodent Crater, the hard thing. This is a pyramid. It's an ellipsoid pyramid, and you saw the jungle around it. This is in the jungle of the Yucatan in Mexico, not far.
That's like bringing coals to Newcastle. Did they need another pyramid?
Well, you were playing with the notion of the pyramid, and it's worth saying the stonemasons were Mayan. There were Maya, the stonemasons that worked on this, the culture that's very much alive in the Yucatan, not gone at all, and very much in dialogue with art of the present. And I think there's that wonderful dialogue that the workers and even everyone had about the old style pyramid and the new style pyramid, made very differently in an ellipse, but in multi-tiers.
Well, wait, at the bottom at Uxmal, that's an ellipse, and it goes up to a rectangle on top at the two foci of the ellipse. So they did, and they made elliptical pyramids. The mound builders made elliptical pyramids up the Mississippi River. Yeah. So it's a form that they use, and the bottom of this is the same size as the bottom at Uxmal.
In Uxmal, which is in relation to that. In fact, I was there when we were scouting the site, and it's over a cenote, which is a natural geologic formation, like a bubble in the stone, which then is filled with water, which were sacred sites for the Maya, and they provided the livelihood for communities in terms of water and also ritual. And then what this piece is a pyramid, and it I think a little bit deals with the creation myth of the chaos and order, but there's a tunnel that actually takes you from underneath the plane of the ground, up through the plane of the ground, and then to the sky, where James, you've placed water. So it's water below and water above on the top of the pyramid once you've broken through. And like the ancient pyramids, your top is just above the tree line, because what's true in the Yucatan is that the trees only grow to a certain height because of the natural geology. And so all those pyramids were to get up to the sky, which you have done here. It's very flat there. As you said, it's actually flatter than a pancake in the Yucatan. And this work is a little, it's a mini pyramid that takes you from underneath. Okay, well, I thought we had another slide of the interior. But you can see its relationship to this found pyramid. This would be hard to build at full scale, as David would know. I don't know, he might be able to figure it out, but I don't know about the budget for the building of this. And so, as you've often said, in this case, you found this in nature, and then you've adjusted it with the tunnels and the chambers, and you searched with your Guggenheim Fellowship. This is when you crisscrossed the Western United States looking for a bowl held up
in the sky.
Yes. Which is maybe that originary moment of why Rodent Crater, why a crater, because everybody says why in the world would you
it's like having a pyramid, but
for an artwork.
You just have to put the tunnels and chambers in it. So I didn't have a pharaoh to build a pyramid, so we just took God's work. that was good enough.
So it sits in the painted desert. It's unfinished still, as you said, your unfinished dissertation. And I think this embodies, when the inspiration for this conference, the plaque on Obama's desk that just said, "Hard things are hard." And I think both of you would attest to that, whether it's a public project.
Bigger than a bread box, and you certainly have done that.
Whether, David, for you it's a public project in an urban environment with so many constraints, including tiny budgets that take a long time, or James, to be out in the desert, creating something that was initially an idea that you had in the 60s, when right here, our President John F. Kennedy was saying, we're going to send a man to the moon. And I would think you were thinking, well, it would be a lot cheaper and easier to bring the moon and the cosmos down to Earth. And in some way, I see this rodent crater as a very inexpensive space program, where, since most of us won't do that, you can see the sun, and I have seen the sun projected through this tunnel onto this stone so that you can touch the sun. Now, that's a really amazing idea, and the sun ends up being about my size. So I have this sense that, here I am communing with this celestial object, and you've made these sculptures. You don't see it projected there, but it's both in marble as that. This is the tunnel, which is over 800 feet long, that brings the image down, as well as provides a way to bring you up into the bowl of the crater. It's almost like a refractor, the world's biggest refractor telescope, although it's not for scientific study, it's for emotional and perceptual study. And these tunnels, and this is the main tunnel, just to give you an image, and then you walk up this tunnel, as it were, toward the light. And there is a staircase, which is a staircase to the heavens, indeed. But it also, this golden colored staircase, bronze, actually brings the light into the space. And as you go up that tunnel, this is the most incredible phenomena. You're looking at a circle the entire way up the tunnel. You're staring at a circle like an orb, like the sun. And as you walk into the space, you realize that is not a circle at all. It's this very elongated ellipse. So again, I've been completely fooled, if you will. But then, of course, I realize a circle is nothing but an ellipse with the foci aligned. I've been taken through this simple math exercise, but in a way that's very emotional. And these holes cut in the ceilings, these sky spaces, have the effect at day or night of bringing the sky literally close enough to touch. Certain artists are famous for painting skies on ceilings, and I guess this is a very direct way of bringing the sky to a space where I can feel it in my own space in a physical way. And then here is the bowl of the crater, which creates a phenomena that I think, James, that you began with this idea of celestial vaulting.
Vaulting, yes.
If I'm in a space, the near space, like the color, if I'm in a green space, I look the other way, it will appear red. What's also true is if my space is curved in a certain way, it changes the curvature of what's experienced in that frame. So what James has done here in a very modest way, architecture, is change the shape of the sky, as well as change the color of the sky. And I think that's a pretty good architectural trick, especially given the history of domes and, forming things like marble and stone and wood to create those forms. And this is the eye where you lie down within it. And of course, there are as many events that happen in the skies during the night as the day. And so this is a project that's intended as a place for you to stay. You can come just for the day, but you can also come for the evening events. And someday, soon,
Yes, well,
it'll be
and
finished.
these things do get practice in other places. Like I did this show at the garage in Moscow. Then went to see your building there, which was terrific because everywhere I go, he's been there before.
Come on, James.
Anyway, but that was something to do that. Then after we did this at the garage, we brought this back, and you had the one. And of course, they completely wiped the program out of the computer for the. Yes, so they do. The Russians do kind of deal with us in terms of the computer issues here, and they have recently in this election. So
it is an interesting blend of where technology does affect that. I want to get to a conversation between two of you together and some commonalities that I actually see in some of your work. But as a way towards that, David, now that you're here, I'd like to talk about a couple of your projects. Do we have? Oh, I see. That's the wrong button. Oh, okay. There is the sky space at the center of Rodent Crater, and at night, where the land does meet the sky. And there's a drawing of the unfinished space that does feel like an eyeball. It's like a cross-section through an eyeball looking at the sky. And maybe we can...
there we go.
So back to Washington, D.C. you have not visited just very nearby, you may have already visited the big museum, nearby are two libraries. Done with public budgets, very small budgets. This is the William O. Lockridge Bellevue Library, again, not far from here. And it's an extraordinary thing done on a very slim budget. When I go into these spaces of yours, I always feel like when I come out, that was a really big building because I had so many experiences. And then you look back and you realize it's not a very big building. But you immediately sense when you're in this neighborhood how this building relates to the houses around. And I did introduce your work and your interest in social space, in thinking about people as much as architecture. And both formally, these things look like porches that are built out of a neighborhood where there are quite a few hills. And of course, the houses all around have exactly the same form. So it's immediately evident that you have used the context of the neighborhood to create a form outside that is instantly recognizable and I think therefore comfortable. And then you go inside this space, and again, it's a little bit Alice in Wonderland because it all of a sudden, well, here's the moving up to it. It's other worlds inside that seem to expand and expand. Here and your use of color, by the way, I don't know if you were taking notes from James Turrell's projections, but you often use color to paint spaces so that they have an atmosphere like a cloud, right?
No, I mean, James is a huge inspiration.
He's not afraid of color, which is great.
No, James is a huge inspiration. As a sort of young student, I was studying all of James's work.
Well, the big thing is that sometimes you might remember playing a symphony or something. You can be in a very small apartment room, and you can play music, and suddenly the space is enlarged. And you're actually in a larger space than you were before the music was on. And so David has made spaces where literally bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's like that car that they have at the circus where 26 people get out of the car. and so this quality of the built environment having references to the world we really live in, as opposed to just this rationalized, what we call the rational environment, where architecture adds space, makes things larger, makes your life, sort of enlarges your life, is something that he's been very much involved in, and I've admired that greatly.
Yeah. And these, it's not just even the sense of space, it's a sense of journey. There are spaces, there are nooks and crannies. There's a place where you feel like you can lie down next to the books or curl up. And I think there's one, I remember the one near the children's section where kids can curl up with a book. Of course, there's an adult there curled up with a book. So also this wonder of kids' spaces. We talked about in New York the Children's Museum of Art and Storytelling. So just say something. You've actually, I think some of your most amazing work has been in this form of libraries, which some people say, oh, they're outmoded, where all books are through Amazon or it's going to be on the internet, and yet you've doubled down on the idea of the library as public space, social space, and that's your own interest.
Yeah, no, I think that the idea of knowledge centers and the idea of public libraries, which is really, the 20th century is when the U.S. really embraced them. Post-war, there was this kind of building of a kind of infrastructure all over the country to allow people to gain knowledge. But I think that what it does is that it creates within a community a collective space, a collective sharing space where different generations come together to see each other and gather. And that, I think, is a very important, even though technology shifts the kind of content of that, I think that the residue of that in our bodies as a place that we go to is very important. And I think that this idea that there are these types of spaces that we come together and enjoy information, it doesn't matter if the technology shifted, but they become these spaces where we come together, are important types that we need to remember, especially as the world is changing. So for me, the library is not lost. The library is just to be remade.
Yeah.
It needs to be remade, and it needs to become another environment for a new generation, which sees itself in a new way. It's not about going along lots of kind of academic files. It's about sharing information, sharing technology. It's about watching technology evolve as it disappears, literally. 5 years throughout making the library, we were sort of at the advent of Wi-Fi and, soft sort of the ability to kind of have kind of completely sort of what I call a soft environment, not hard wires everywhere. And so we were already designing a building which had to kind of think about that, where, so it was already evolving. So, but what it does is I think it brings architecture much more back to its primary purpose, which I think is this idea of a kind of understanding of where you are, a way of making a sensation of place, a way of being able to understand the world, still not just the world as a kind of large phenomenon, but the world specifically where you are. And I think light is like one of the powerful mediums. So for me, color and light are the same thing. When I use color, I'm really talking about light. I'm not talking about color as a symbolism, but as a kind of light.
Yeah. Well, and you've often used, one of your techniques always is to somehow using darkness to frame that light and to intensify it. There are buildings you've made in London that I've seen, there are houses where they're dark and you've used darkness to really enhance light. I mean, even this museum has that quality of using a bit of darkness to turn the volume up on that light and experience. But one of the things about these libraries is that, you think about the library as to receive knowledge and this universe, but when I'm in your libraries, it's sort of like all that is there because that's the world of possibilities. And I think they are often as inspiring as places to absorb knowledge as actually think there and dream of what you might do to contribute to that knowledge or to life. And I think there's an interesting reversal in public space. Museums, I think the best museums do that same thing. All that knowledge is really not like required reading because you have to know it. It's a world of possibilities like that library. And I mean, I had 100 ideas when I was sitting in your library of other things to do, I think, because it is inspirational in that way. And I guess you continue that idea of social space. In these neighborhoods, it seems to me that these are now social centers, right? Almost like town squares?
Correct. Yeah. No, Jake.
Well, I mean, the big thing is that we are these strange crustaceans. We make these forms that we inhabit, and almost like a hermit crab, then we now will leave this shell here, go get an immovable shell, and get out in another one, trying to keep from.
It's a beautiful description.
And so these shells we put around us, and so they're more than just the form and the monument of the architecture. They are what these shells do, how they open out onto other possibilities, and what they contain and what they help us with. And so I think that the idea that there is a community that inhabits these things is important, because you can go and see buildings that are empty, have been emptied of use, and often they look dead because there's no consciousness that inhabits them. And so conjuring up this consciousness and what it can do and what its possibilities are is really the job of the architect, which is amazing to be able to do that, because it has a lot to do with people and those who actually, with consciousness, inhabit these structures.
David, this is the other Francis A. Gregory Neighborhood Library, and I think to Jim's point, and also the slides we showed of Roden Crater, one of the things you're so good at is taking the shell and puncturing it, like this, and creating permeable membranes, whether through mirrors, glass, openings, to the outside. Say something about that idea of the permeability. I think it's like one of the most important aspects of your work.
Thank you. I mean, I sort of became very disillusioned with the idea of the window just as a kind of device to bring light in, or a glass wall as the device. Because I think that, yes, practically that makes sense, but actually emotionally in our deep subconscious, I think the idea of light really is about the way in which it's filtered and it's sort of, so I think back, I kind of imagine the sort of perception of light from a forest or from a hilltop or from a cave looking out. So for me, I think that we're deeply hardwired with this emotion, and I'm interested very much in allowing architecture to reach back to that emotion. So for me, when I'm making a piece of architecture, I'm thinking about how that perforation evokes an emotion, and how, for me, the window kind of denotes a kind of 500 years of architectural history, and I'm trying to go further back. Yeah. I'm interested in going further
right,
back.
to a more
Yeah.
ancient sense of,
Exactly.
of permeability between inside and outside,
And outside.
before air conditioning.
Before air conditioning, before the seal box. Yeah.
Which seems to be always the issue of sealing us in.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this notion of community, James was talking about, space has to be inhabited by a consciousness, by people. This is in Moscow, and it's one of your most ambitious projects. I mean, it is a crazy, crazy project. And it's a school, it's Moscow School of Management, but really it's to inspire, I think, young and old in a community, this is in a very derelict part of town, and to revitalize itself through education and economics, to have kids become interested in also technology and business to create a sustainable world. Yeah. It's on a university scale. So this is talking about scale. You're a city builder here. Do you think
Small
that way? Big ideas?
I think I'm really obsessed with ideas and not scale. I try not to think about scale, right, James? I mean, I try not to, because I think if I started to think of it as the idea of the city or the idea of the object, I think that sort of collapses your creativity. Right. So for me, it's just the kind of the issue of the idea. And this was about a couple of things. One, it was to create something inspirational for, sort of management class, and not to feel disempowered by a kind of history that immediately was, I think that sort of early 20th century history, which is where, that modernist idea came from, really. That sort of constructivist idea really comes from Russia, right? But that history is completely lost. And, if you go to most, the classical world has kind of taken back that idea. And none of these buildings or these ideas that were kind of dreamt of 100 years ago were kind of brought to fruition. Very few kind of models were tested. So I was really fascinated by this idea that one should make one of those dreams, which was the idea of a building that defies gravity, but is a city, a building like a city. So it's not just a single building, but it's a hybrid building, which all the parts from what I call the mind and the body are at play. So it's a building about respite. It's about exercise. It's about looking after your body. But it's also about the mind. It's about sort of almost these monastic walks that kind of meander through this complex that allow you to meditate and meet other people and engage. But also then these sort of angoras, these kind of sort of spaces that are the digital teaching spaces about the world that you live in. So it's this, and then the idea of the image of the building is really, again, back to light.
Yes, but
because
it's also something that has just immediately gentrified an area. Completely restored and put
there was nothing there.
There was nothing there.
It put the dream into this area.
Yeah, it created something out of nothing, which is really astounding in that way, that it's also created economy. And there's this notion that architecture can change the world. I think as art can, in really material ways, because it can change the way people think, as well as be physical in creating spaces for people to interact, to learn. I mean, this is your most recent monument. I feel lucky as a visitor. And as I said earlier, as someone who grew up around here, to have you have been selected as the architect for this building, which I knew would have so many amazing aspects to it. And it is a monument. It sits in relation to monuments. It plays with the idea of monument, I think, in a very playful way. And it's not only, I think, about transformation of society, the struggle, pain, celebration, but it is also, I think, again, intended to continue to transform society in some way, in ways that are unpredictable, by inspiring those who visit to see new histories, see different histories. I was overhearing last night conversations in front of objects and people talking about, well, I didn't exactly learn that in school, or I learned that in a different way, and that makes me think differently already. And again, how you framed light in it is super inspirational. I think the change is yet to come of what this building will hopefully inspire. There are a few James Turrell moments in it. I have to say that contemplative court is very James Turrell, and very lessons well internalized and
I really believe that art and architecture is about learning from things that are done. I mean, not copying, but learning from. So I'm very conscious of that. I think that it's foolhardy to sort of pretend that there isn't a history and an incredible body of knowledge that's being kind of formed. So, I think James...
But the other thing that's so strong is this inside to outside.
Yeah.
And this lacy transparency and looking very physical and then being almost...
dissolving.
dissolving,
Yeah.
evaporative. I mean, that's why I find it very strong.
Great. Thank you, sir.
And so that's a great strength.
That means a lot. I mean, there's a little emotional moment.
There's a point here about that too. That is that we've talked a lot about imagination and images, and even touching on illusion and all these effects that happen. But I think we shouldn't forget that even James, in your explorations of perception, then that affects my daily life. I don't lose the experience of your work when I'm in this world, because it has changed the way I see the real world. And David, there was a quote that I saw that a museum or architecture could be something that, like a cinema, you would go in and then have that experience and go out. But I think what's true about these experiments with perception, they're not just aesthetic, and your museum is not. And you say, because the experience of being black is not a fiction. There's something important about always coming back to the light of day. And I think that is a wonderful way you've used a formal element, light, James, you have in perception, to create a change in a concrete reality. And I think that is very intentional.
Very intentional, yeah.
The one thing I notice about that, and it's something, I'm tying these two very disparate things together, you both also are always looking at other achievements, other cultures, other places. That building is inspired by a Yoruba pedestal, or it's like a pedestal, like that inverted ziggurat form that we know from that art and architecture. Yep. I see so many references to other cultures. When I'm walking on Road and Crater, I'm seeing references to the Hopi. I'm seeing bits of Buddhism. I'm seeing European tradition, and I'm curious about your thinking about that as artists, architects, about building upon other civilizations, cultures, other ideas. Seems like you both do that.
When I was young, I thought that we were building a culture.
Yeah, one human culture.
Human culture. And of course, we can't even have, there's not even a political party with a plank that has to do with culture or art or architecture. So I'm glad I'm not a single issue voter. But because my issues haven't been taken care of. But I think it's, this is the big thing that we all thought that we were about. And that is happening, even though it may be disregarded in some of our social things right now. But it's something that artists, architects are really paying attention to, certainly in music and as well. So this is forming. Yeah. And that it forms that way is natural and exciting. So and I think that watching this happen in architecture is amazing. And if you think of how we lived, just think how we lived 40 years ago, how we ate, the food we ate. Boy, we've raised the bar on food and restaurants and eating. And just drive a car from 40 years ago, and it drives like a truck compared to a car today. I mean, the cars will accelerate faster, brake faster, have more comfortable seats, and a better radio. So just whether it's art, architecture, we have been raising the bar. Everyone thinks that things are going downhill. But we have really raised the bar throughout the culture, and boy, tolerance has changed.
Yeah, I
have to say that this is one of the biggest things that I've ever felt, and this changing of tolerance, yes,
is changing. I think that's right, and these big ideas. This was inspired, this whole conference, by, I think, trying to inspire others to have big ideas and not to feel that the system is something that is working against us and you can't create those things. And James, you've done that, working 4 decades plus on almost fifth decade, and Road and Crater and things that are you can persist with. And David, you've done that again. I mean, you've also come all the way from Ghana to get here to talk to us about this.
They wouldn't let him through the wall, though. He was stopped at customs.
You guys are poster children for persistence.
I had to brag.
Yes,
I had to
right.
brag to the customs officer that I did this building down the road.
You're due at the White House,
I need
so
to
please
cut a run.
You guys are that. You're poster children for this persistence too. And James, we talked a little about, those 60s, you could do anything. You could send a man in the moon. But David, you, just to maybe end, you grew up in a very different environment, from a different place of the world, with different experiences in a completely different generation. And yet you've pursued your vision to this museum, a huge idea. Can you convey that inspiration, that sense of possibility to others? I mean, you've done it here in your work.
No, I just think that we live in an age where it's incredibly, I mean, there's just so much, there's so many roots, I think, now. There's so many, it used to feel like a world where it was a kind of singular root, not many kind of branches. And I think there are now, I think what is possible is that there are so many ways to contribute to culture and society and to the world that we kind of believe in. And I think that what I find inspiring about the time we live in is that there are these incredible possibilities. So I don't see limits. I mean, I know there are so many limits, but I see with those limits incredible opportunities all the time. Because I think as things collapse, then things can also be changed. I mean, as things kind of close down, things also open up. So I'm very much interested in this dialectic. And so when people think things are finished, I'm always interested in saying, oh, well, that means that we're opening something else. Yeah. Right. So I'm maybe I'm an eternal romantic optimist, but that's what drives my my creativity, and also my belief in not also seeing, like we were even talking about things from the past, that, the past isn't finished, it's continuous. Mm-hmm. So, referring to Egypt or to the Mayans or to the Buddhists it's still all real for me. It's much more Einsteinian. It's much more a kind of Einstein sense of time rather than a sort of progression of time. It's all happening, and we should understand what we need from each thing and use it to help the times that we're in.
Yeah, I think something that's exactly right. And I think also just something you share is that there's a sense of locality, of specifics, down to the materials you both use, or the land, or the references, the bronze, and how you use that in terms of historical references, but also localities. And also there is taking from other times and places. And I guess that's also a signal. It's like hard things are hard. There is also no black and white rules about localism versus globalism. There's no simple answer. No. There's a combination of things, and we must be mobile enough to accept these other influences, build things locally. And I know both of you have done that so beautifully, and I know that the rest of the president's program is going to continue soon, and I think we have the mayor here. So I just want to say an incredible thank you to both of you for the hard things and the big things you are contributing to our world every day.
Thank you.
And thank you both for taking the time. We have, so I think we have some closing remarks. Yeah. So I just want to say that, and I think we have our, do we have our mayor here? Yeah. Oh, she's coming right here? Okay. Well, in the meantime, before the mayor is here to close this, last question then. I'm going to ask you the audience question since I know we don't have time for that. Talk a little about localism, globalism. Like here, the mayor of D.C. is going to be here. There's an urgent community needs, and you've made things locally, but then you do reach out to the world and take influences from everywhere.
I mean, I would even say local and planetary. I would say specific and I prefer the word planet than global, because global kind of, for me, is economic and somehow abstract.
Well, I'm waiting for this. I like to do a nice project in Olympus Mons on Mars.
Space,
That's one of the
I think
bigger
planet is
volcanoes.
Not enough. Sorry, I
heard it
just
today.
closed it down. I'm
In
so
the
sorry.
spirit of
I forgot we're in a solar system.
hard
The galaxy.
and big ideas, we are now going to include the cosmic.
Brilliant.
It's worth saying, just to go back to the Gonsfeld piece at Los Angeles, if you see it, James once described it to me as the new landscape because it has no horizon. And this was very meaningful to me in thinking about being immersed in this space. And he said, but we're already there between the cyberspace, where there's no horizon, and
No up nor down, no left nor right.
no up, no down, no left, no right, or the fact that space travel is upon us, no up, no down, no left, no right. That's a basic assumption we live with every day about gravity and that horizon in front of us. And I think that idea that an artwork or architecture can constantly provoke that new thinking, which is what you both do. And we are very lucky, actually, to have for our closing remarks Mayor of DC, who I've seen once and seen speak, but mostly on television. And you are changing this locality. I know that you have incredible, you've been here since 2015 as mayor, Muriel Bowser, 7th elected mayor, and your focus on job training, on education. I think you have, and we should all help end homelessness. And I think that's been an amazing effort of yours. You are also extremely well educated in public policy, and I think your focus on exploration of talent, education, and talent is very relevant to this this session right now. So, Mayor Bowser, thank you for being here and closing this.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am very happy to be here in the beautiful museum and certainly delighted to be able to help close out this exciting panel. I want to acknowledge all our friends at the museum and certainly thank the organizers of the White House for partnering with us and Events DC to put on a fantastic South by South lawn. So I'm happy to help kick it off. And it's really hard for me to turn down an opportunity to talk about what we're doing in Washington, especially around innovation and ideas, and especially around making Washington, D.C. the hub for inclusive tech in the nation, right? That's good. That's good for Washington. I want to acknowledge my Deputy Mayor, Brian Kenner, and Brian will tell you that his job is to bring more revenue to the District of Columbia, create more jobs for Washingtonians, and to make sure we're investing in affordable housing across all 8 wards of the district. We are very lucky to be a city that is growing, to be able to invest in our priorities, and to be able to focus on not only being a city for the 670,000 of us that live here right now, but plan and prepare for our future. And that's exactly what we're doing. So one thing about a city that adds net 1,000 people a month, they need great housing, and it should be beautiful. Right, David? Inspiring. And we need a lot of it, and it has to be affordable. Can you do that? And so that's why we are working, we are always encouraging people to think about the big problems of cities. We've thought about technology and art and innovation and all of that on some of our practical things like transportation, and we need that too. We also need you to focus your good ideas and action around the human services. You talk about how we're going to end homelessness. So when you're at South by and you're thinking about all of these ideas, think about transportation. Think about the more technology-focused solutions that we're familiar with, but also think about the human services and how we change things. I had the opportunity, I was pretty proud of David on Saturday. I'm proud of him all the time, but I got the chance to meet him a few years back, and we're talking about our libraries and our schools in Washington, D.C., and now to have a building on the mall is pretty incredible. And so our focus, and I think that you probably have had an opportunity to meet Angie Gates, who's responsible for film, television, and entertainment in the District of Columbia. And we want the word to get out far and wide that people come to Washington, D.C. in the arts and entertainment, and they can work here. We also want the people who are involved in those creative jobs to know that we want to build an ecosystem for people so that they can work and build their families here. And we're finally getting some notice around those ideas as well. Brian came to me last year and said, we're going to be the tech hub for the nation for underrepresented communities, and we're going to lay out the groundwork to get there. So I'm already excited that women in tech do very well in Washington, D.C. Women entrepreneurs, I think the second best. We're first best. I think we started out as second best, and now we are the best for women tech entrepreneurs, and that's important. Last year, we broke ground with Howard University, our partner, in creating a tech hub on Georgia Avenue, one of our corridors. And it will open imminently with Luma Labs, and we're very, very proud of that as well. So those are the important things that we're doing to build an inclusive tech hub in Washington, to focus on how people who are involved in the arts can see how they can link their work to action around, different problems that we have in cities that they may not have even considered. And we, of course, want to make sure that we're working in partnership with our friends at the White House. And many of us are looking at the past 8 years and are very thankful for what President and Mrs. Obama have done with the city, and we can only hope that those partnerships continue. We know that there are going to be residents of Washington, D.C., not just of the White House in a few months, and they will have the opportunity with me and 670,000 Washingtonians, not just to talk about the fabulous things that we can do together, but to also be in partnership with us with one of the big issues, one of the big injustices of our nation, and that is that 670,000 people who live here and pay a lot of taxes don't actually have a vote in the Congress. And that's one thing that we're focused on in D.C. So go back to your states, wherever you're from, tell them how fabulous our city is, but also tell them to focus on statehood for Washington, D.C. So enjoy South by. Let me thank the Events D.C. leadership and board for their support of this event. And when the White House calls you and asks you for some help, what do you say? Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. And that's why we've been proud to host this event. I think it's going to be a party too, right? And a party. So after you share all your good ideas on the lawn, join us this evening as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Thank you, David Adjaye. Thank you, James Turrell, for sharing your time and ambition and art and architecture. Thank you for just listening, but to hopefully contribute to this project, as James Turrell said, of making our culture. And I know this is an amazing a day of events to inspire new thinking. So thanks to the White House for that, and for DC Events for hosting us. And thank you for being here. Have a great day.